Please turn your Bibles to 2 Kings chapter 3. Good to have our visitors. We've got some people from Pensacola here with us and some other family in town and a lot of people gone. So kind of a small number for us tonight, but that's okay. It'll be more intimate. I like it that way. So we are going to be talking tonight about two different Jehorams. And we'll also talk a little bit more about Jehoshaphat. But before we do any of that, we're also going to do a review, a pretty good review, because we're at this point kind of entering into the fog. We're halfway through this quarter, and we've talked about a ton of kings and a ton of battles and events and stuff. So we'll be doing a bit of a review before we dive into the prepared material for the night. But before we begin with any of that, I've asked Mike if he would to lead us in a word of prayer. If y'all would please bow with us.
Father in heaven, we're thankful for this evening that we can all get together and study out your word. Help us here in the adult classes we go through the kings and the divided kingdom, that we can see the mistakes that they made and understand what happened and the consequences of their actions. Be with the other teachers in the classes as they present their lessons, and be with our members as they're traveling on the roads to various places over holiday. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. All right, so let's review the kings that we've been looking at thus far, starting with Judah. Okay, that's awful. Whew. I've got it like down on my belly button. So the first three, and y'all know I like to do groups of three. So who are the first three kings of Judah? Rehoboam, Abijah, Asa. And I encourage you just to memorize that as one group. So there we have the first three, and then the first king of the next group. Yeah, we've been talking a lot about Jehoshaphat. So we haven't gotten to the next ones after him in Judah yet. And in Israel, who are the first three? Jeroboam, Nadab, Baasha. That's it. Jeroboam, Nadab, Baasha. Y'all are speaking all at different times, and so it's just kind of coming through in waves. But all right, then the next three. All right, Elah, Zimri, Omri. All right, and then the next three, starting with Ahab, his son Ahaziah, and then another one of his sons, Jehoram, also known as Joram. And so that's where we've got to thus far with all the names. Just the names are kind of overwhelming, right? Kind of confusing until you just really try to memorize them, and that helps. But what I want to do is just kind of review, as I said. First of all, how many kings that you see thus far were good kings? 2, and who are those? Asa and Jehoshaphat. And of course, you know, if you're going to try to find a good king, you got to look on the side of Judah. You're not going to find any good ones in Israel. All right? How about in Israel, how many times has the kingdom turned over to another dynasty thus far? How many dynasties? There have been 4. So Jeroboam and Nadab, and then the house of Jeroboam was cleared out by Baasha. And so there was Baasha and then his son Elah, and then the house of Baasha was cleared out by Zimri. Then Zimri was killed by Omri. And so that's 4 different dynasties. But that doesn't happen in Judah, because that's the line of David in Judah, right? We all know that. So the house of Omri is continued through to Jehoram, and that's going to be the last one. He's soon going to be wiped out. We'll get to that. All right, now let's kind of go through one by one, more or less, and just point out some real basic, quick facts, stories about these different kings. What about Rehoboam? What's the main thing that jumps out to you when you think of Rehoboam? Yeah, he was harsh towards the people when they came to him wanting the work to be lighter, and as a result, the kingdom of Israel split off, and that's when the divided kingdom happened. Good. What about Abijah? There's not much about Abijah, but there's one story about Abijah. Do you remember what that was? It's actually a pretty positive story, though he was a wicked king. It was a war with Jeroboam, where he trusted in the Lord and Jeroboam did not, and God gave Abijah victory. All right, what about Asa? Good old King Asa. Ma'am?
Good guy.
Yeah, he's the first good king since David. I mean, Solomon started out good, but... And Asa, he really has some bad stuff later on in his life. It's almost more bad than good that's mentioned. But anyway, he's a good king. What does he start out doing? I mean, the land is idolatrous, so what does he do? That's right. So he gets rid of all the idols. He destroys the idols. He renews the covenant with God. Then what's the first really negative story about Asa? It was involving a prophet that rebuked him, right? Basically, he had hired the king of Syria to come and attack Baasha, king of Israel, instead of trusting in the Lord to help him with that situation. And so Hanani the prophet came and rebuked him. And do you remember what Asa, this good king, does towards Hanani, or to Hanani? He put him in prison. It's hard to believe. And he also did that to many other people in the land who were probably critical of him. And then what's the last really negative story that is very unique about Asa? Had to do with his feet. Yeah. He had diseased feet. And who did he call on? Who did he seek help from? Physicians and not God. And so that's kind of, that's his last story. Pretty sad. He reigned for 41 years. Long time. All right, then we have Jehoshaphat. And Jehoshaphat, he started out really good. And he's a really good king, but there's some negative stuff too. So what about Jehoshaphat kind of jumps out at you right from the start?
He liked God to start with.
Ma'am?
He obeyed God.
That's right. And he continued the reforms. He sent out teachers, remember, throughout all the land to teach the people the law. And he also strengthened the kingdom. Remember that? And, the military was, there was like 1 million soldiers. It was incredible. But then there was some negative stuff about Jehoshaphat. Do you remember any of the negative stuff about him? He made a treaty with Ahab. And to seal that treaty, how was that treaty sealed? Those of you who've been in the class. Yeah, his son married Ahab's daughter. And we're going to talk more about that in a second. He just wanted to be buddies with the kings in the north. And one of the lessons we can learn from that is, do not be unequally yoked to unbelievers. He also made an alliance with Ahaziah and trying to make ships, and God saw that didn't go anywhere. And we're going to study tonight how he even tried to help Jehoram, another one of Ahab's sons. He just really bent over backwards to be unified with those kings. You've probably heard the illustration that if you tie two cats' tails together, you might have union, but you don't have unity. When we try to have unity with the world, that's not real unity unless we make some concessions to the truth. All right, what about Jeroboam? We're going to the northern kingdom now. What's obvious? What's the first thing that jumps out to you about him?
He set up
the golden calves. All right, the golden calves, Dan and Bethel. And then one of the stories about the golden calf. Remember the man of God? What was that story about? He cursed the altar. And what happened to him? His hand shriveled up. And Jeroboam's hand shriveled up. And the prophet prayed and his hand was restored. And all the other stuff that happened with that man of God. And then there's one other thing with Jeroboam regarding his son. Do you remember what that was? His son was sick. Remember that? So what did he do? Yeah, he sent his wife, disguised, to go to Ahijah, the same prophet that had told Jeroboam he'd be king. And what did that prophet say? Your son's going to die, and Jeroboam's whole house is going to be destroyed, and all that, in not too long. And that's exactly what happened. So now, after Jeroboam, his son Nadab, there's not really anything significant to point out, except that he was cleared out by Baasha. And nothing really significant about Baasha to mention. Nothing really significant about Elah to mention. But what about Zimri? There was something interesting about Zimri. Not in a good way interesting. Short reign, right, Miss B? How long was his reign? It was a week. So if you can try to remember, the king with that's name starts with the last letter of the alphabet, he comes in last as far as the length of time reigning as a king. And how did he die? No. The people had appointed Omri as king, and Omri was coming, and he knew it, so what did he do? Yeah, he knew he was going to die anyway. So he committed suicide, burned the palace down on top of him. So then there's Omri. Omri was very significant in terms of history, but the Bible doesn't give us a whole lot of information. But there is one thing about Omri that is very significant. Do you remember what that was? I remember what that was. I heard somebody say something.
Marriage alliance?
No. I'm sorry? He was worse than all the others. That's true. He changed the location of the capital. It was at Shechem, and where did he make it? Samaria. So, Bible, these Bible facts and Bible knowledge is it can get kind of a lot to kind of wade through, but it gets fun. I geek out on it. I love it. Okay, and then Ahab. What's the first thing you think of when you think of Ahab? Evil. Married Jezebel. And she even had the word Baal in her name. And through her influence, Ahab institutionalized Baal worship and everything. Yep. And what else about Ahab? Something regarding Elijah. What was that story about? That was the whole story about the contest on Mount Carmel and the rain stopping and starting again and fire coming down and consuming the offering and Elijah fleeing once Jezebel wanted to kill him after the prophets were all killed, the prophets of Baal and Asherah. So all of that. And what else? There's another really, really upsetting story about Ahab. Remember what that was? Nadab. I mean, not Nadab. Naboth. His vineyard, right? Good. And how did he, in his last story was he had wanted to go and attack recapture Ramoth Gilead. And he asked Jehoshaphat to come and help him. And what did Jehoshaphat say? Oh, yes, my men are with you. He was always eager to help the kings of the north. And so he goes, but they inquire of the prophet Micaiah, who, long story short, tells him, if you go, you'll die. So he thinks he can sneak around and kind of get around God's will, and he puts on a disguise, but does it work? No, a Syrian archer just randomly shoots at a soldier he sees in a chariot, and it was the king. And he died, and the dogs licked up his blood in a pool that harlots bathed in. That was his death. Very sad end of Ahab. But we're kind of happy to see him go, honestly. Then we get to Ahaziah. There's really only one story about Ahaziah. We just studied it that really jumps out. And what is that? That has to do with he had fallen, through the lattice, and he was hurt, and he sent to inquire of what God. Remember we talked about that? Zebub. Remember we talked about that? And then that whole story about Elisha. No, that's still Elijah, calling down fire from heaven to consume the 50 with the captain and the next 50 with the captain. I don't have to go through all that. All right, so that's a little bit of a review for you. Hope that wasn't overwhelming. Hope that helped a little bit. Now we're going to start talking about Jehoram, the king of Israel. And so we're in 2 Kings 3. Jehoram was evil, but he was not evil like his father and mother. So he actually got rid of the sacred pillar of Baal. And, however, he did allow worship. What kind of worship did he allow? That golden calf worship that had been started by Jeroboam. It was still going. Still going on. And would never be turned away from in the entire history of the northern kingdom. So, at this point, the names will start getting confusing. Because we're going to have some of the same names for kings in Judah that we will Israel. And they're interconnected through family. So, I'm going to show you something that I hope will help to clear the waters, but I'm afraid will muddy the waters even more. But again, like I said, this stuff is fun for me. So you've got Omri, the one who cleared out the house of Baasha, or Zimri. And Omri, his son is Ahab. Ahab marries Jezebel, and they have 3 kids. Athaliah is a daughter, and she's going to come up later. She's going to usurp the throne of Judah later. So remember her. And then 2 sons, Ahaziah and Jehoram. Both of them became kings, right? So we're pretty familiar with that family tree, hopefully. Now we'll go over here to Judah. Starting with Jehoshaphat. Jehoshaphat had a son named Jehoram. And he becomes a king. Now here's the connection. Remember the treaty of peace that Ahab made with Jehoshaphat? It was through the marriage of their children. So this Jehoram, son of Jehoshaphat, married Athaliah, the daughter of Ahab. This Jehoram is related to this Jehoram by marriage. They're brothers-in-law. Don't say brother-in-laws. That's bad grammar, right? Brothers-in-law. Then Jehoram has a son named Ahaziah. I don't know if he named him after his uncle or not, but it's possible. People do that, right? Isn't that terrible? So now you've got Ahaziah down here. He's the nephew of this Ahaziah over here in Israel. And so it gets kind of confusing. And then there's going to be Joash that we'll talk about. So, like I said, hopefully that helps you. And it helps me. All right, now we come back to the narrative, and we're going to talk about the first story involving Jehoram, and this is Jehoshaphat and Jehoram fight against Moab. So Jehoram of Israel decides to retake Moab, which used to belong to Israel, and he asks Jehoshaphat for help, and no surprise, Jehoshaphat is ready to go. Yes, I will help you. And so Jehoshaphat suggested that they take a path to get to Moab by going south of the Dead Sea. Now, you could get there, by going north of the Dead Sea or south. But the south actually made more sense in this case because you had Jehoram coming from up here, coming down to Jerusalem, getting, Jehoshaphat and his army. Then you've got both of these kings. They go down here, and Edom belongs to Judah, so the king of Edom has to help. So now you got 3 kings, and they're up here in Moab, and they're going to go and attack Moab. The territory south of the Dead Sea is very dry. Here's a few pictures. Now this actually looks very pretty, but I guarantee you wouldn't want to walk around on this barefooted. That does not look like it would be fun, and it's very arid, very dry. Here's another couple of pictures. This is the southern area from the south, looking north, and then this one is also from the south. So they're out here, and there's no water. They ran out of water after 7 days, and they need water. And by this time, they were on the southern edge of Moab's territory, as we said. And so Jehoshaphat asked if there was a prophet to inquire of. This is not the first time we've seen him do this. That in itself is good, to ask, isn't there a prophet that we can inquire of? Now, I don't know if he had done that before. He even set out on this trip. I'm not sure. But now he's out here, and we're going to call on the Lord here. We're going to see what a prophet has to say. And what prophet was there that was suggested? Elisha. And so we're going to read in 2 Kings 3, beginning in verse 13. Now Elisha, we're starting verse 13. Now Elisha said to the king of Israel, "What do I have to do with you? Go to the prophets of your father and to the prophets of your mother." Whew. And the king of Israel said to him, "No, for the Lord has called these 3 kings together to give them into the hand of Moab. He's convinced that the Lord had arranged this, and he thinks that the Lord had arranged this so that they'll be destroyed by Moab. He thinks he knows God's purposes. I don't know why he thinks God called them to this. I don't know if God had spoken to him. We don't know about that. But he's convinced that the Lord has planned for all this to happen. Elisha said, verse 14, as the Lord of hosts lives, before whom I stand, were it not that I regard the presence of Jehoshaphat, the king of Judah, I would not look at you, nor see you. But now bring me a minstrel. What's a minstrel? You might have to talk louder. I can't hear you. All right. So a musician, and the instrument is going to play. The instrument is probably the harp. And it came about when the minstrel played that the hand of the Lord came upon him. He said, "Thus says the Lord, make this valley full of trenches." Now let's kind of pause here. Here's a picture of a valley in that area. I don't know if this is the valley, but it's something. It would have been something like this probably. Probably a wadi that normally had water in it that was dried up. So he's saying dig trenches. Okay? He's commanding for these people to dig trenches. Verse 17, for thus says the Lord, you shall not see wind, nor shall you see rain, yet that valley shall be filled with water, so that you shall drink, both you and your cattle and your beasts. This is but a slight thing in the sight of the Lord. Don't you love that? This is but a slight thing in the sight of the Lord. It's no big deal for him. He will also give the Moabites into your hand. Then you shall strike every fortified city and every choice city, and fell every good tree, and stop all springs of water, and mar every good piece of land with stones. I'll ask you a question. Was Elisha right to treat Jehoram with such disdain?
Yeah.
Anybody think no? Well, good, because I would tell you you're wrong. Because I think he was right to do this. In fact, in the New Testament, in 2 John verse 10, it says, if anyone comes to you and does not bring this teaching, meaning the doctrine of Christ, do not receive him into your house, and do not give him a greeting. For the one who gives him a greeting participates in his evil deeds. Now, that's not politically correct. That's one of those verses we just kind of like to just kind of skip over, and we like to talk about the ones where we can all, just kind of be tolerant of everybody. And this is a tough verse, but this was really the attitude that Jehoshaphat should have had toward Jehoram. I don't want to have anything to do with you. Sometimes when we help wicked people, we're only enabling wickedness. We're encouraging wickedness. And I even think sometimes I need to be careful, because I like to say to people, God bless. And I just have a habit of saying that. Well, I may not know if this individual really is somebody I should be saying that to. Well, they did as Elisha said, and they dug trenches. And the next morning, there was water flowing from Edom, all in that valley. The land was filled with water. And there was an additional blessing. When the army of Moab, and they were all out there, when they looked out in the distance and saw the water, maybe the sun was red that morning, but somehow the water reflecting the sun looked like what? It looked red like blood. And can you just kind of picture that? What did they think had happened? Yeah. They thought that these 3 kings, the king of Israel, king of Judah, and king of Edom, must have, gotten confused and started fighting against each other. Well, there's a really logical reason why they may have thought that, or why they did think that. This is a possible reason why they might have thought that. Remember, and I forgot to actually mention this, but Jehoshaphat had been attacked by a coalition from the south that involved Moab. Involved Edom. and Moab, and came up to attack him. And he didn't know what, he was kind of blindsided, and he prayed to the Lord and said, we don't know what to do. This is a great, numerous people, but our eyes are upon you. And then God basically didn't even make them fight, because he just had those enemies just turn against each other and fought against each other and killed each other. It's pretty amazing. God doesn't have to have an army at all. And so they had that experience with themselves, and so it's pretty natural that here they would then think, well, that's what our enemies did to themselves. So hurry, let's go and let's take their plunder. And so you just imagine, if you're rushing to get plunder, are you ready for battle? No, you're not even worried about your sword. You're not worried about anything. You're worried about just grabbing stuff. And so you show up ready to get stuff, and these people that you thought were laying down dead jump up and start fighting you. And it was a great victory for the Israelites and those who were allied, the Edomites. And then they invaded and they destroyed the land of Moab. Only the city of Kir-Hareseth was left. Here's a picture of that, or here's where it's located, and here's a picture of modern I don't know if I'm saying it right, but the Carrick Castle. That wasn't there at that time, but it was built in the time of the Crusades. This is really their most famous castle. I had a lot of pictures of that. It was really cool, but didn't want to take the time to show you that. So the king of Moab, he saw that he was being defeated, and he took 700 ninjas. These were swordsmen. These were his special forces, and went and tried to break through to the king of Edom. Why? I don't know. I don't know if it was he thought that maybe Edom, who was his former ally, remember they had just recently fought against the king of Judah, maybe thought maybe he could get help. Or maybe he thought, this is the weakest king of the three, and I can defeat him and then escape. But whatever the case, his effort did not work. And in total desperation, what does he do to try to get favor with the gods and try to get to get divine help? He offers his own son as a sacrifice on the wall. And verse 27 tells us, and there was great indignation against Israel. I don't really know exactly what that's about. It doesn't tell us. That seems to indicate there was indignation from God against them, but it's just kind of leaves it there. And so they went home. The battle was over. Applications. I've got 5, but I'm going to let y'all go first if anybody feels like talking. You don't have to. Mike?
Just a comment. It seems odd that this war started because he didn't get 100,000 pelts of wool, the tribute. So what does he do? He goes down there and wipes the whole country out, covers up the good land, blocks up the springs. So it's destructive, and he still doesn't get his 100,000 pelts of wool. You see how vindictive? It doesn't make any sense. The whole war doesn't make sense.
Well, maybe the wool was just kind of a way to start the war, and God had a purpose with it because this is a wicked nation that he wanted to bring judgment on. So that's a good question. Jason?
It is not necessarily an application, but you made a comment about saying God bless the folks. And at least for me, I would like to offer my attempt to ease your mind, because that's a generic statement. We're hoping that God blesses them. Well, the blessing they may need may be salvation. So I don't think wishing someone a blessing from God is ever going to be bad.
That's a good thought.
You didn't say God bless them with $1 million. Say God bless them. And I know most of that thought from your mind is not physical but spiritual. And so you're concerned for their soul.
Yeah.
And their need may be salvation anyway.
That's helpful. That's good. All right. Any applications anybody wants to bring up that y'all can think of? I'm going to dive in. Number 1, don't assume you know God's purposes. That's what Jehoram assumed. He thought that, God brought us out here to kill us by the Moabites. And sometimes when things are going bad, we might just think, man, God has brought me to this point just so that terrible things are going to happen to me. But we haven't seen the end of the story yet. And if Jehoram could have seen forward and seen the result ahead of time, he would have known how wrong he was. Right? Second, don't easily trust wicked people. I think it's great that Elisha was so cautious about Jehoram. And that's an example for us that, sometimes we're just so quick to want to show approval and to be friends that we sometimes jump a little too fast at trusting people that don't deserve to be trusted yet. And that's going to end up getting us hurt. Number 3, look to God for direction and care. I mean, that's simple, but that's exactly what Jehoshaphat does. It wasn't Jehoram who said, let's call for a prophet, but it was Jehoshaphat. And that's what we need to do when we don't know where to go, we don't know what to do, we don't know how to fix this situation. We're down here, we're in this land, there ain't nothing for us to survive by. Pardon my Alabama grammar. Call on God. Call on God.
And a subset of that is it's never too late to look for God for direction and care either. Because like you pointed out, Jehoshaphat probably should have, we don't know if he did or didn't, but if he didn't, he probably should have had that conversation with the prophet before he said yes to Jehoram.
Yeah.
And so, yes, look to God, but also a reminder, it's never too late to look to God.
That's a good point. Yeah.
Well, until it is.
That's a good point.
I don't know where that.
Yeah, and if any of y'all have something to throw in, so I'm not just up here talking, please, jump in. All right, number 4. Oh, Bill.
No, this young man right here, I think.
Did you have something?
Well, I thought you did.
I was just going to say along the lines that you just said, Elisha is way out of his territory in this. When you look at the map, clearly Elisha is making this trip, and he's been there the entire time, and nobody talked to Elisha before this.
Yeah.
And they had all kinds of opportunities to consult him, and they didn't. But the man of God was there to help when he was called upon. You're like, God's always good.
That's a good point. That's a great point. The last place we know that Elisha went after Elijah had been caught up to God, Elisha kind of makes a circuit, and he ends up going to the capital. He ends up going to Samaria. So he would have been there when the king left, and probably just followed along, and he was there when he was needed. And God was using that. And that was God's way of providing in that situation. That's a great thought. Yeah, it's very good. Number 4, great works of God are small in His eyes. They're big in our eyes. But something like bringing water in a barren land without rain, to God, and we don't even know how He did it. It just water flowed from Edom. That's nothing. He created the heavens and the earth. And number 5, desperation often leads to grievous sin. Desperate times call for desperate measures, and sometimes that means, well, I wouldn't normally do this sinful thing, this wicked thing that I'm about to do, but I have to do it in this situation, whether it's stealing or whatever it might be. Don't do it. All right. Any other thoughts you want to add to these applications? So let's move forward now and talk about the death of Jehoshaphat. He reigned for a total of 25 years, but then he died and was buried in the city of David. He was a righteous king, but the hearts of the people were not wholly set on serving God. Question: why were the hearts of the people not wholly devoted to the Lord, even though Jehoshaphat's was?
He left some things in place that allowed them not to be focused. He left high places in place.
Okay. That's one thought, and I had that thought, and I looked at that. There's a little confusion about that, because it's possible that what that's saying is he did clear out all the idols, but the high places for worshiping Jehovah were still left. So the people still had worship of Jehovah, but they were worshiping Him like pagans. That's possible. All right, but assuming it wasn't his fault, the answer is simple. we can't change people's hearts. Don't try to judge your success in the Lord's eyes by whether you can change people. Trust me, if I have done that through the years, I've learned that I'm a total failure. Because I can't change nobody. I can encourage people. I can try to convince people, but only if a person has a good and honest heart. And these people come around, like Karen back here, who's come back from Texas, we start studying together. How many people have I studied the gospel with and they didn't respond, or when they did, they just completely forsook the Lord? But here's a person with a good and honest heart, same information, same effort made, but the response is totally different. Was that my doing? No, it was God's doing. It was the gospel.
God is the only one.
That's right. Amen. Okay, so Jehoram of Judah now. So we're moving down. We get to Jehoshaphat's son. So at this point, we've got a we got a Jehoram. I'm going to have to get out of the habit of saying Jehoshaphat now. We got a Jehoram in Judah and a Jehoram in Israel, and we've already talked about how they're related. And of course, they're brothers-in-law, as we talked about. Now, Jehoram had been a co-regent with his father for 2 to 3 years previously up to this point. So I haven't mentioned that because I thought it was already confusing enough as it was. But he's already been ruling with his daddy. Well, now that Jehoshaphat is dead, Jehoram is king alone. Very wicked. He walked in the ways of Ahab, but God didn't destroy him. Why didn't God destroy Jehoram and his house? What promise?
The line of David.
That's right. Let's look in 2 Chronicles 21:7. We've got a little less than 3 minutes. 2 Chronicles 21 and verse 7. Yet the Lord was not willing to destroy the house of David because of the covenant which he had made with David, and since he had promised to give a lamp to him and his sons forever. Here's the passage. It's in 2 Samuel 7, where Nathan the prophet is speaking to David. He, talking about the descendant of David, shall build a house for my name, and I will establish the throne of his kingdom forever. I will be a father to him, and he will be a son to me. When he commits iniquity, I will correct him with the rods of men and the strokes of the sons of men, but my loving kindness shall not depart from him, as I took it away from Saul, whom I removed from before you. So in some ways, this passage is speaking collectively of the descendants of David. In some ways, it's a direct reference to Jesus Christ, of course. And so that's why. Moving forward, Jehoram of Judah kills his brothers. He's got 6 of them. Why would he kill his brothers?
They were a threat.
They were potentially a threat, but this is what pagan kings did. Who was he married to? Athaliah, the daughter of Jezebel, the daughter of Ethbaal, king of the Sidonians. The pagan influence has now infiltrated into the southern kingdom of Judah, and that's the price we pay when we want to buddy up with wicked people and be their helper and their encourager and their enablers. It influences generations to come potentially. Edom revolts. Edom had been under Israel's control, revolts. Libnah was, that's the wrong button, anyway. Libnah was a city that revolted. And why did both of them revolt? It's because Jehoram forsook the Lord and things just start falling apart. Well, I left 35 seconds. Any last closing thoughts, comments? Don't leave me hanging.
Sometimes the evil that they did it saw its way through to several generations. Sometimes the evil that they did was brief and didn't ripple out in the people as much.
Yeah.
But Ahab and Jezebel, they seem to, I just feel like they're some of the most memorable evil.
Yeah. And that influence continued on for generations. All right, please read through the middle of page 55 for Sunday. And thanks for your attention and your comments.